gone out and seen demons cast out. We've experienced the power of God. We'll deal with this. And what does he say? He says, I told your disciples to cast it out, and they could not do it. Verse 18. They couldn't do it. What in the world? What this possession? He says, my son, possessed with a spirit which makes him mute. Does that mean he can't say anything? No, it means he can't say anything intelligible, anything understandable, because look, in verse 18 it says, it seizes him, it slams him to the ground, and he foams at the mouth, grinds his teeth, and stands out. And later, when he comes to Jesus, it says that he cries out. So it doesn't mean that he can't make sound, it's that he's unable to form words. Yet, you see the desperation. Just listen to this description of the boy. It seizes him and it slams him to the ground. In Luke's account, this word translated slams is a different word in the Greek, and it's a word that means tears him down. It just throws him down. And so here's this young son, this young man. I don't know how old he is at this point, but he's young enough that the father's bringing him. And I would guess probably teenage. But he's being thrown by the spirit, this demonic spirit, into the ground. So it's not just making him mute, it is trying to destroy him. Because look at what it says in verse 21. Jesus asked him, how long has this been happening? And he says, from childhood. What does that mean? Essentially what he's saying is, as long as I can remember. I don't know when exactly, but it's been going on so long, I can't remember a time that it wasn't going on. I mean, talk about a trial of a father and his mother, and that will affect every single person in the family, not just this young boy. It will set them all free from the demonic power, because the devil, when he attacks us, he's not just attacking you or me. He's attacking everyone related to us because he hates us. And he knows that if he can attack one of us, then he can attack others who are connected to us. And he wants us to begin to believe, well, if so-and-so is going through this, then I can't believe either. If this isn't working, then maybe God can't be trusted. I don't know what this father was doing from the moment that this started with his son to this moment here with Jesus. Who knows? He could be crying out daily to God. And finally he hears about Jesus. He's like, I think he can heal this man. Maybe he heard a story of Jesus healing a deaf or dumb man. Who knows what he heard, but he had to have heard a story. He wouldn't have come looking for Jesus unless he knew that Jesus might be able to do it, might be able to take care of this. But he had been going through this trial for so long, he had given up hope that he could see freedom, that his son could be set free, because it was so bad. It was so bad in verse 22 that it says, it often threw him both into the fire and into the water. What was throwing him into the fire and into the water? The demonic spirit. You don't think that demons have power? This is one. I believe the only reason this boy did not die in those instances is because he did not want to die. Even when a demonic spirit takes over someone, you still have some control. There is still control to fight back. And so this boy, though he's being thrown into the fire and the water, the devil was not able to destroy him. That was his goal, right? steal, kill, destroy. Goes about like a roaring lion. But here we see a boy who is honestly exhibiting a lot of signs of what modern day would be epilepsy, right? I think a lot of what we deal with today, and we give it a diagnosis and we say, well, that's the problem. We deny the fact that there's a spiritual connection, and we can never set free. I know people in high school who dealt with epilepsy, and they had a problem. One time we were going through like that area of Frankfurt where there's like walls, like the rock walls on the interstate on both sides, and the bus, that person had to close their eyes. They dealt with, it was an adult, and they were medicated, but their whole life dealing with that. The medication didn't set them free, it just removed some of the symptoms. Made their life livable. But what this boy is coming, he doesn't want his son just to be, surviving. He wants his son to thrive. He wants his son to be set free. He wants to see his son delivered. And they tried and it didn't work. Why? Why didn't it work? Well, Jesus says in verse 19, he says, "O unbelieving generation." Who's he talking about? Is it just the disciples? I don't think so. I think he's including the scribes, because the scribes are probably like, see, you don't know what you're talking about. You don't have faith. Y'all are frauds. He's also talking about the Father. And how do I know that? Because the Father says, "I do believe, but help my unbelief." I think he's talking about generally everyone in the crowd. Does that mean he doesn't care? That he's just going to leave him alone? Because listen, this doesn't sound very good. "O unbelieving generation, how long shall I put up with you? Bring him to me." Now, I think when Jesus said, "Bring him to me," this demonic spirit knew something was about to go down. And I would suspect that this is exactly what happened when the disciples said they could take care of it. I think they saw the very same thing and they did not know how to deal with it. They did not know how to deal with it, because as soon as the boy was brought to him, what happened? He immediately the Spirit threw him into a convulsion. Immediately. It wasn't like, something random happened. It was like immediately. This was exactly because Jesus had said to bring him to him. And falling to the ground, he began rolling around and foaming at the mouth. If you want an argument against holy rollers, here might be a good one. I'm not saying that's necessarily what is the point of this, but rolling around on the ground is not a holy act, right? That's not something that you typically do. Now, maybe if you're wrestling, we can ask Joel, you might roll around on the ground trying to get somebody pinned. But generally speaking, is not a very educated, and they're just there, and the demon slams him to the ground. He's convulsing, so shaking all over, and begins rolling over and foaming at the mouth. Now, if your dog did this, what would you think? You got a dog with rabies. It's time to put it down. But here is a boy, a young man who is controlled by this demonic spirit. And Jesus, he doesn't freak out. He's not like, "Oh no, what do I do?" I've never seen this before. No, Jesus calmly asked, how long has this been happening to him? And that's the thing. Jesus doesn't approach the situation with fear or terror or difficulty. He comes in knowing the truth. He knows the power that he has. He knows why this demonic spirit is doing what he's doing at that exact moment. And so he asks a question, and I believe this question answers something for us. You're going through a trial you've gone through for a while, or you're going through something that you can't understand. It just doesn't seem like there's hope. Well, this is pretty hopeless. My guess is that before this boy could speak, he was possessed by this demonic spirit. That's what he means when he says from childhood. Now, obviously, that is my interpretation, but I do believe that's what he's saying. I think Jesus asked this question for two reasons: to get this answer, to give us the idea that this wasn't just started yesterday. This has been a long-term trial, and though the trial has come, he is about to change something. And he also knew, so he knew the timeline of the trial, how long it had been, and look here, and it has often thrown him in the fire and into the water to destroy him. He also wanted us to know that, and the people who were there, and Christians throughout the ages to know, that this is what the devil does. He will start as early as he can. He does not care about our children. He does not care about us. He hates us. And he will do everything he can from the very beginning of our lives to destroy us. This is why parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, we have a responsibility to raise them as unto the Lord, because the devil will start the moment they're born. He actually tries to start while they're in the womb. Mothers, you know this. The devil starts at the moment that he can. He does not care. He hates your children. He hates your grandchildren. He hates your great-grandchildren. And he hates every generation after. Why? Because they are image bearers. They were made in the image of God, and they have a purpose for his glory. And he knows that if he can destroy their lives, then he can ruin the glory that God would receive from that life. That's what he's trying to do. So Jesus is reminding us through this answer. He knows the answer, right? He knows what's going to happen. So from childhood, this demonic spirit has been trying to kill him. And then, thirdly, we see what the Father thinks, where he's at. But, this is a big, we talked about this word before, right? And the kids all thought it was funny. He says, but if you can do anything, take pity on us and help us. If you can do anything. Can you do anything, Jesus? Can you help us? He's struggling. He just saw the disciples couldn't do anything. Do anything. Maybe what he heard about Jesus was wrong. Maybe the disciples are just doing what Jesus would do. I mean, he just saw his son thrown down on the ground again and all this going on. Maybe there's no hope. So he says, if you can do anything, take pity on us and help us. So first he's questioning, can you do this? Secondly, he's asking him, will you do this? Not just if he can, but will he? Right? Because he says, take pity on us. Have compassion. Show us mercy. We need it. Help us, Lord. We're at a place where we are destroyed. We don't have anything, and I don't know what to do. Take pity on us. if you can. Now, how many of you reading this story have felt like you're right there before? Or maybe you're there right now. I don't know. But God cares. He's listening, and He hears the if. Now, I know I've heard this in the past, and I don't agree with this. I've heard, well, if you don't have all the faith, then it doesn't work. I disagree with that because of this verse. Look at what Jesus says in response in verse 23. So remember, the Father's asking if He can and if He will. They're two different things, right? You know, my kid asked me, can you pass me that plate? I can say, I can, but I don't want to. Right? Can you, you know, we all go back to grammar and what our parents raised us to say, but we don't use those words the same like we used to. Now we say can when we mean will. Can you come over tomorrow? How many times have you said that, or someone said that to you? Can you? Probably. Will you? Probably not. Or, you know, whatever it may be. I don't know if I want, you know. No, I can't. I'm unable to. And they're like, well, why? And you have to give your explanation. But Jesus responds and He says to him, if you can. If you can. What is He doing? Now, this is one reason why, and I know some people might get upset with this, but this is one reason why I don't like the King James Version. Because King James actually adds a word after this, and it's not in the Greek text at all. It's actually in the book of Matthew. It's in the Matthew's telling of, but it adds the word, if you can believe. It's not there. You know why it's not there? Because Jesus is repeating what the Father said. He's just repeating it like a question. If you can, like talking about Himself in the third person or second person. I guess third. I don't know. I'm messing up my grammar. But if you can, like, what is He saying? It's not a matter of can I. It's a matter of will I. Right? If you can, Jesus is saying, yes, I can. I can, I can, I can. That's what He's saying right here. He's not saying, well, if you can believe. You know what He's saying? I am God. There is nothing outside of my power to do. I can do it. It's not a question of if, it's a question of will. If you can. Have you ever done that with someone, maybe your kids? They say something and you repeat it back? Because obviously it's something you can do or something that you repeat it. Why? Because you want to emphasize that what they're saying is wrong. And that's what Jesus is saying. He's essentially saying, you said if you can, I'm telling you I can. It's not a question of if, it's a question of will. And then this is where will comes in. So Jesus is saying, I can. And He says, all things are possible to him who believes. If and will, right there. All things are possible to him who believes. If you believe, yes. Look at Matthew, and now I forgot, I should have put a note here, but see Matthew, it's interesting, the translation for King James adds information that's found in Matthew to this story in Mark. But the thing is, the emphasis in Matthew is different. each writer, God spoke to them in a different way through the story. And it's not that they're subtracting or adding to the story, it's that God gave each of them an emphasis. And I believe that Matthew's emphasis is faith specifically. Mark's emphasis is the ability of God to do what He said He'd do. It's not a question of can God do something, it's a question of will. And here, I don't know the reference in Matthew, but if you go and look at Matthew's telling of this story, you'll notice that faith and believe is there everywhere. That is the emphasis for Matthew. And that's why it's such a beautiful thing to read each one and see. But it's interesting, Mark 9 is the only place in the Gospels where you get this detailed story of what's going on. In Luke, it's just, He healed him. You're like, whoa, I don't remember that being such a short story. But here it's very detailed, which is interesting because Mark is one of the smaller Gospels. But it has a lot of detail in this section. So Jesus says, if you can, all things are possible to him who believes. So, you're the father. You've experienced your son going through this for at least a decade, probably. Who knows, maybe longer. We don't know the age of this young boy. But here Jesus says, I can. I can. Don't say if, say you can, if you will, because that's what he asked. And he says, and Jesus says, I can if you believe. If you believe. That's all it takes. And immediately the boy's father cried out. Why did he cry out? He's desperate, right? He just said, have pity on us, help us. Not just my son, help me. We are all under this oppression of the devil, and we need freedom. We need to be set free. And he cried out and said, I do believe. Help my unbelief. Maybe the trial you are going through, you've been believing, but there's something lacking. You feel like there's something there I'm missing. I don't know why I have this lingering doubt. I don't know why this is struggling. Maybe because the length of the trial. Maybe because the extremity to which the trial have gone. Maybe it's the prognosis. Who knows what the trial is? But what Jesus is saying is, if you believe, I will set you free. And the Father says, I do believe. Help my unbelief. I want to believe my faith because these guys are following you and they can't deal with it. I've experienced a lifetime for my son, seeing him go through this trial. So he doesn't say, he doesn't turn dejected and walk away. Do you think when Jesus responded, he didn't know what the Father was about to say? He did. He knew that Father's heart. He knew what was going on in his heart. He knew because his word said it, if you can. He didn't have full confidence that Jesus could do it. So Jesus gave him the care that is holding me back from fully holding on to this and saying, yes, this is for me. So did Jesus say, sorry, you have unbelief, you got to go? Because unfortunately, I've heard some people preach that essentially that's what they say. Well, if you don't have it all figured out, then that's the problem. And I disagree with that. I'm not saying that we shouldn't believe. I'm saying that God, and we can cry out to Him, just like this father did. Unbelief! And what does He say? When Jesus saw that a crowd was rapidly gathering, He rebuked the unclean spirit, saying to it, "You deaf and mute spirit." So not only could this boy not hear or not speak, he couldn't hear. "I command you, come out of him and do not enter him again." So, what did Jesus just do? Did He do what the Father asked? Yes. Was this father completely, 100% settled? Was his face isn't sitting there thinking, "Oh, I don't want to help him because he doesn't believe," because there's some bit of doubt there. But He cares. He desires to set us free. He doesn't want to see the power of darkness defeating us and setting us back. He wants to see freedom. Now, we sometimes have to go through trials. Why? For the building up our faith and the glorifying of God. Because as we're going through that trial, what happens? People look at your life and say, "How can you love God when He treats you that way? How can you say God is real and you're a good person and yet you have to go through that trial?" I mean, look at Job. Prime example. You follow God and look what happened to you. And guess what happens when God turns it around? Do you get the glory because you were good or great? No, He does, because I just trusted Him. I struggled. I didn't understand what was going on. I had to fight through doubt and fear and terror and pain. And